I read again your piece at The Economist. If I'm not mistaken, it was in May. Actually, The Economist, every year in December, they would send the most widely read articles, and it was featured yours. And recently in Le Monde, you had actually an update of this piece that effectively you are calling for a new Marshall Plan. And actually coming from a country, Greece, that has benefited from the Marshall Plan. We will have the left-leaning government of Syriza in the past years actually calling for an EU Marshall Plan for the periphery. Actually, I'm very intrigued by your proposal. So can you give us some details, please?
Well, the analogy to the Marshall Plan is the analogy of post-war recovery. And one thing that was striking after the war is a fairly, actually quite quick rebound of economies that were even profoundly affected. So you're looking at Japan, you're looking at Germany, and towns that were entirely leveled picked up quickly and at a rapid growth rate. So they kind of went back to wherever they would have been in a relatively short amount of time. And one thing that made that possible is the Marshall Plan, which is the original investment that allowed people to get the economy humming again. So in May, we were calling for the Marshall Plan for the poor country to make that possible, because precisely, although we didn't have the number then, we anticipated something like what happened in reality, which is the poor country being unable to borrow in order to mitigate the short-run effect of the crisis and then kind of overcome them as soon as the health conditions were possible. And nothing remotely like that happened. But then it was May, and in a way, we were, too early for our times. It is pretty clear that in May, rich countries were completely obsessed by their own issues, which, were severe, to be fair, and nobody was ready for that. Now, I think so the reason why we kind of went back at it at the end of 2020 in Le Monde is we felt, look, now that we see vaccination coming along, now that we see the end of the tunnel for us, is the right time to put back this idea. The Marshall Plan actually was, people started thinking about it at the end of the war, started thinking about reconstruction effort towards the end of the war.
I see that you listed 3 priorities. Perhaps you want to tell us and a bit elaborate on those.
So the first one is vaccination. That seems clear, you mentioned it. So a country like India is able to start their own vaccination program, partly because India is the pharmacy of the world. So if someone can manufacture vaccines, that's India. In the rest of the world, at the current pace, it is estimated that Africa would finish vaccinating their population in like 80 years or something like that. And that's crazy. It's just, it can't happen. First of all, because that's a ethical just nightmare that we would allow an entire continent to go without those vaccinations that are life savings. Second of all, because it just wouldn't make any sense from the point of view of Europe. Because as long as vaccination is not mandatory in Europe and therefore far from universal, if it's in Africa, it's in Europe. It's basically, it's not even in question. If it's in Africa in a large number, it is going to come back via the share of people who choose not to get vaccinated in Europe or in the US. So it's absolutely necessary that we vaccinate. If a particular country is not willing to vaccinate their entire population, they have to be, for their own self-interest, from the purely health point of view, wanting to vaccinate as many people as possible in the world. And yet, despite that, there is a group, the ACT Accelerator, that is kind of coordinating the purchase of vaccines for the developing countries, and it has a huge shortfall. The second thing is the economic pillar. And there it's, how do you help kickstarting the economies? Like what can you do now, even if we didn't do it before, to help poor countries relaunch? And that's when you, I think, don't need to be shy. spending money, and basically spending money on the poor country the same way that we spend money on ourselves, which is basically via direct transfer to people. So in Europe, in the US, they are targeted via the unemployment system or via furlough. In developing countries, they could, particularly in the poorest, they could be made simpler via temporary cash transfer on a universal basis, just to help people start consuming, producing, etc., so the economy can be restarted. And the third pillar is that of innovation, because the pandemic has revealed so much new problems. I mean, there are always new problems, but there are even newer problems here. Like, for example, how do you vaccinate 1 billion people in India? That's kind of a new problem. They haven't had, they're doing polio every year, but that's a different one with the condition of a vaccine. How do you deal with education when kids have been out of school for months, and so on and so forth? And for that, we need to be willing to find new solution, test a new solution, roll out of that works, etc. And with those three, we could, as a world, go out of the crisis much faster.
Is your idea of the Marshall Plan to go back to what we were before, or it's a bolder agenda to have a more common responsibility between emerging, low-income, and rich countries more generally?
Well, I think it would set a template for what is the role of the rich world with respect to the poor world, or to emerging market or to poorer countries. The way we are thinking about now is we are thinking about it as charities. Whenever we have time and whenever we have the energy and whenever our political stars are aligned and we have some aid budget and we are thinking of ourselves as maybe replacing a part of what the country should be doing themselves, or should be doing anyways. And that's like the wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is that these countries have very, competent people. Not all of them are equally benevolent, but that's equally true in rich countries, that not all leaders are equally benevolent. So we should stop looking down at poor countries and just looking at poor countries as countries that happen to be poor and therefore don't have the same capacity in the face of a crisis, and don't have the capacity in investing in sort of the venture capital of designing policies. And our development policy should be along these two lines, which is when there is a big crisis, we're there to help. When there is a need for innovation, and then there is always a need for innovation, we need to help finance that. And in particular, that becomes critical when we are thinking about climate change. I think we need to completely rethink the role and the responsibility of the rich countries vis-a-vis the rest of the world in the context of climate change, which is mostly produced in the poor countries and whose consequences are mostly felt in the poor countries.
Produced in the rich countries.
Produced in the rich countries, and where the consequences are mostly felt in the poor countries. And if we don't start thinking about what our so far pathetic behavior as shown during this crisis is that when there is a climate crisis, if we are not prepared for it, that's not when the rich world is going to suddenly wake up and do something for the countries that are the most affected. So we need to rethink that solidarity in this way. And the Marshall Plan is like a pilot, if you want, a template.